This part of the admonishment chastisement that Moshe is giving the Musa to Klal Yisroel, and he says, "Vayisaber Hashem bim lemantchem." Hashem became angry with me on your behalf. Lo shama elai, and he did not listen to my supplication. So we explained that with Orach Chaim it's very good lemantchem, because if Moshe would have gone in, the Beis Mikdash would have been built, and the Beis Mikdash couldn't be destroyed, and therefore they were deserving punishment. So therefore, I was not allowed to go in to build the Beis Hamikdash, because if I would have, Klal would have to be destroyed. The other interpretation we said was according to Tosis and Soto, that he brings a midrash that every year there's a prosecution of Balpor against Klal, which is that prosecution which you can't quelch. So therefore, Moshe was buried opposite Balpor. So every year when it comes out of the ground to prosecute this force, it sees Moshe's grave and it goes right back into the ground. So I was given the test that Hashem knew I would fail, although it was my choice to speak to the rock or hit the rock. And therefore, because ultimately you people would have been prosecuted with a prosecution which you couldn't respond, therefore I had to be buried there for your sake. That's how we explained it. That's Lamantchem. Because factually, the reason why he didn't go in, he struck the rock rather than speaking to the rock. But the reason why he was given that challenge, that choice, was because Hashem knew he would fail. He would choose to fail. And as a result of that, Moshe cannot go in. Because if he would have gone in, Klal would have been actually victimized through the prosecution. Then he says to Moshe, V'yom Hashem Elai, Ravloch. In addition, Ravloch, Al Tosef Daber Elai Obdav Razeh. You have much reward, and therefore you have no right to continue speaking, supplicating me. Let's see, Rashi, Ravloch, Shlo Yomru Harav Kamakosha. They shouldn't say how difficult is the master, but Talmud Kamash Sarvon, and how, despite the persistence of the subject, the student, therefore it's a chil Hashem. It puts Hashem in a light which people don't understand why. So as a result of that, you have no right to speak further. You have much reward. So we mentioned before Tisha B'Av that Hashem says to Moshe, what do you want to go in? You want to eat of the fruit, which you haven't eaten of the fruit of the land. You want the reward for the mitzvah tluis b'oretz, because there's certain mitzvahs which you did not fulfill, because you have to be in Eretz Yisrael. I'll give you full reward for those mitzvahs. Tluis b'oretz. Therefore, there's no reason for you to go in. It was known, which I didn't mention, the Chassam Sofer. Any mitzvah that he was able to fulfill, as difficult it was to fulfill the mitzvah, he made sure to do the mitzvah. For instance, Shluch HaKan. Although Shluch HaKan is not an obligation, it's only if you come upon it. You have to send away the mother bird before you take the chicks or the eggs. But factually, there is a mitzvah saseh that's known as Shluch HaKan. So if you do that mitzvah of sending away the mother bird, what happens to the person who fulfills that mitzvah? The obligation is only once you come upon it. But factually, the value of that mitzvah is it perfects your neshama in a way which, if you wouldn't have come upon it, you wouldn't have that level of perfection of your neshama. Every mitzvah, I'd say, has a result, has an effect. It's a positive effect. So even though you don't have that obligation, but if you seek it out, then what? And you fulfill it, it has that effect. So the level of perfection of that particular mitzvah affects you in that unique way, which is the mitzvah itself of Shulchan Aruch. I'll give you an example. One does not have an obligation to put on tzitzis. Torah says that if you wear a four-cornered garment, you must wear tzitzis. So let's say a person chooses not to put on tzitzis, not to wear a four-cornered garment. If you don't put on a four-cornered garment, you're not in violation of anything. Because the obligation is only if you bring the obligation upon yourself. If you wear a four-cornered garment, then you must put tzitzis. So the mitzvah say is only in the context if you wear a four-cornered garment. But let's say a person has the ability to wear the four-cornered garment, and he does not. What is he denying his neshama? What level of perfection is he denying himself? He's denying himself the perfection of tzitzis. So the person can say, but I had no obligation, because the obligation is over if I wear the four-cornered garment. Nevertheless, you denied yourself the value of tzitzis, which would have perfected your neshama to a certain level. The Gemara tells over a story in Menachos, which speaks about the mitzvah of tzitzis, that it was Namora. His name was Rav Katina. Rav Katina was his name. And a malach comes to him. In those days, you didn't buy clothing off the rack. Everything were tailor-made garments. And he says to Rav Katina, why aren't you wearing tzitzis? People wore tzitzis on their outer garments, or any garment that was a four-cornered garment. So Rav Katina says to the malach, because whenever I have my garments tailored, I always make sure to round off the corners. So because the corners are rounded off, I have no obligation to wear tzitzis. That's why I don't have tzitzis. Torah only says you're obligated to have tzitzis if you have a four-cornered garment. I make sure that when I have my garments tailored, it doesn't come to a corner. So I have no obligation. So the malach says to Rav Katina, but you realize, if there's ever a shas zam, if there's ever God's anger comes onto the world, under normal circumstances, there's no claim against you. But if there's ever a time that you need a special schus to silence prosecution, as a time when there's a charonaf, God's wrath is on the world, and you don't do a mitzvah, you didn't do a mitzvah which you could have done, that mitzvah will come to haunt you. That will be a basis of prosecution. Because the mitzvah that you could have fulfilled easily, and you chose to circumvent the mitzvah, it's a claim against you at a time of prosecution. On normal circumstances, not. But if there is a charonaf, God forbid, on the world, and you didn't do the mitzvah, which you could have done the mitzvah, then you're going to be prosecuted for not doing the mitzvah. What's the understanding? Because again, even though you may not have the obligation to do the mitzvah, but when you do the mitzvah, you're a beneficiary of that mitzvah. That mitzvah advances your level of perfection regarding your neshama. So if you could have perfected it and you did not perfect it, I'm satisfied here. But if you would have been more perfect, you could have had a more intimate relation with Hashem. Why don't you do it? So Tosa says in one location, in Tamura, that's only a mitzvah that you can do easily. A mitzvah which comes with great difficulty, even at a shazam, at a time of charonaf, there's no claim against the person. For instance, in the time of the Gemara, to be able to get tchelis, which is the snail that comes out of the ocean, it's once every 70 years. The cost of tchelis had an enormous cost, tchelis, that you put on your tzitzis. And even if you paid it, it was very difficult to get. So the Gemara refers to tzitzis, which we have as lovan. The strings are white. So let's say a person didn't have tchelis on the tzitzis. Is there a claim on him? So those says there's no claim. It's only a mitzvah that you can do easily. But a mitzvah that you can't do easily, it don't comes with great difficulty. At sacrifice, there's no claim. Even at shazam, at a time of charonaf, there's no claim against the person. So Rabbeinu Yonah says in Shari Tshuva, which we haven't gotten there yet, that any mitzvah, it's not specifically tzitzis. Because tzitzis, the Mechaber rules in Shulchan Aruch, that even though one does not have an obligation to put on tzitzis, it's only if you wear the four-cornered garment. Nevertheless, one should bring the obligation upon himself. Why? Because mitzvah is shokol keneged kol haTorah kula. The value of the mitzvah tzitzis is the equivalent of taryag. That's how valuable tzitzis is. So there you're denying yourself a special mitzvah. That's what the Mechaber rules. But Rabbeinu Yonah says any mitzvah that you could do easily, you could easily bring upon yourself, although it's not an obligation. If you don't, God forbid, if there's a shazam, if there's chorna'af and you did not, God forbid, a person can be victimized with a claim, why didn't you do the mitzvah? That's Rabbeinu Yonah. So I'll give you an example. The Chavetz Chaim writes in the Avos Chesed, where he speaks about all the levels of chesed, that a person has an obligation, and he speaks about the obligation of im bekesef talva salmi. A person has an obligation to lend his fellow Jew money. Well, you can. And he speaks about all the details and the applications. Many people could lend money, and this is what he says, very interesting. A person wants to collect for waiting for his money, wants to make money on his money. So he writes a heterisko. He writes a heterisko. So the way the loan is structured, it's not a loan, it's an investment, it's a dividend. The way the money is given. So the Chofetz Chaim writes, if a person's a banker, and that's his business is how does he earn money? By lending money. Yeah, it's one thing. But if a person has another means of income, and he says he has some money on the side, and he says you can make a few slivers of silver, few slivers. You realize once you give money in the context of Eterisko, you're not doing the mitzvah saseh of kesef talvasami. You're not doing the mitzvah of lending money to your fellow Jew. That's not called a loan. That's called an investment. So a person is willing to forfeit the mitzvah saseh, for a few pennies that you're making. That's what he refers to. He says, if you're a bank, that's one thing, that's your livelihood. But it's not your livelihood. You have another means of livelihood. It's just you want to make a few extra cents, so to say, relatively speaking. What's the cost factor? You're willing to give up mitzvah of imkesef talvos abni, which is mitzvah saseh, for the sake of a few cents. There, he says, there's a claim. Because here you're able to do the mitzvah, and you choose to circumvent it with a head to risk and not to do the mitzvah. That's the Chofetz Chaim. There's a story with Chofetz Chaim. Chofetz Chaim's son-in-law, his name was Mendel Zaks. Mendel Zaks was a Rashiva yet in Ravna. He was married to his youngest daughter. And he was like amazed, Mendel Zaks, about the Chofetz Chaim. Very often, the Chofetz Chaim had a coach driver who was a Jew, a religious Jew. Why? Jews never had a coach driver that wasn't a Jew. Why? Because in Europe, the Goyim was suspect that if they take the Jew into the forest, they would kill the Jew and take all his belongings. So a Jew, if he ever went onto a coach, the coach driver was always a Jew, not a Goy. For that reason, because they were suspect of murder. So Chofetz Chaim had his own coach, and he went very often. He went on mitzvah missions. And when he was older, he would say to his son-in-law, we're going to Vilna, wherever we're going, and they had the coach driver. And he was amazed that sometimes they'd be traveling all day. They'd get back 1 a.m. Chofetz Chaim was old already. What did Chofetz Chaim do when he got back, when he was 1 a.m? He'd go straight to his dining room, open up a Gemara, and sit and study for a few hours. And he'd say to his son-in-law, I wasn't able to study all day because we were involved in whatever the mitzvah mission was, so I have to make it up. So he would make up the hours at night. Mendel Zaks was like amazed. He says after a day of traveling and the intensity of that, whatever they were involved in, he said he couldn't stand straight. Literally, he was like almost dizzy from it. And the Chofetz Chaim had the ability to make up what he didn't study during the day, and he would study it for a few hours. So the Chofetz Chaim says to his son-in-law, did you make sure to pay the coach person? Did you pay him? He says, of course I paid him. Not only did I pay him, I gave him a tip. This is what Mendel Zaks said to his father-in-law, the Chofetz Chaim. Chofetz Chaim said, I didn't ask you if you gave him a tip. There's a mitzvah say that when you have a Jewish employee, you're supposed to pay him on the day that he worked, not delay his payment. So when you pay him on time, you're fulfilling the mitzvah say of B'yom Hatiti Lo Soro. On the day that he works, you should pay the wage on that day. When you gave him the wage, do you have in mind that you were fulfilling the mitzvah of B'yom Hatiti Lo Soro? He says, no, I didn't. You know what Chofetz Chaim did? He waved his hands like this. You missed an opportunity. You could have had opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah of a Yom Hatiti Lo Soro. On the day that you do the mitzvah, you pay your employee, you're supposed to have in mind that watch it fulfilling mitzvah. So I gave him a tip. He said, that's my question. My question, did you have in mind? Did you have in mind to do the mitzvah? Well, mitzvah strichas kavana. Mitzvah strichas kavana. Mitzvah doraisa. You're supposed to have in mind that when you do the mitzvah, you're doing it for the sake of the mitzvah. Otherwise, it's a question whether you actually get credit for the mitzvah if you don't have in mind. So Chofetz Chaim said, since you put yourself in a position where you may have passed on that opportunity, therefore he waved his hand almost like in disgust. How do you miss such a valuable opportunity? Chassam Sofer, any mitzvah that he could fulfill which he did not, which is not a common, for instance, there's a mitzvah of kisei adam, that when you slaughter a bird, you should cover its blood. So a person is a shochet and he works in the chicken market, right? All day he slaughters. So it's understood only on a bird or undomesticated animal. So even a person is shochet, he works in the slaughterhouse where he slaughters cattle, there's no mitzvah to cover the blood. It's only if he slaughters a chicken, a turkey, it has to be a kosher bird. So let me have you ever filled the mitzvah kisei adam in your life? Most people haven't. So I remember when I lived in Baltimore, Yeshiva Lane, one time Rabbi Heinemann did a shechita, slaughtered a chicken, and I asked him, could I do the kisei adam? Because the mitzvah of kisei adam belongs to the one who does the shechita. It belongs to him. So he left some blood for me of some of the chickens, and I covered it. So I know at least once in my life, at least once I did the mitzvah kisei adam. So I know it's part of my portfolio of mitzvahs. I did it. Shluch HaKan I did multiple times. Not only because it has such value of Shluch HaKan, Avichas Yomim, what the Torah speaks about, but still just the mitzvahs I say. How many people have not done Shluch HaKan? If you're not able to, it's like we can't do mitzvahs at Sporets. We can't bring korbanos. We don't have a Beis HaMikdash. So a person's not able to, and you want to do it, okay. You study the pasuk in the Torah, corner of Beit Bach, you get credit even if you didn't do the mitzvah. But if you're able to actualize the mitzvah and you don't, then you don't get credit for it. For instance, time to be Samigdash. If you could bring a korban, you could study the portion of that korban. One doesn't get credit for bringing the korban. In actuality, you have an obligation to bring the korban, whether it's the Ola, the Shlomim, whatever it was. Today, that we don't have a base of English. The Gemara says whoever learns the Parsha of Ola, it's as if he brought the Ola, the Chatos, the Shlom, whatever it is. So the same thing with the mitzvahs. There's certain mitzvahs we're not able to do. Okay, you learn Shluch HaKan, the Torah gives you credits you as if you did Shluch HaKan. But if you're able to do it, and it's according to Tosus who says that if you could do it easily, like tzitzis or anything, then Chas v'Shalom, if there's ever a Shazam, there's a Charon Af on the world, then Chas v'Shalom, the person's held accountable. Because you could have done that mitzvah easily and advanced your spirituality, why didn't you? As a result of that, there's a claim for that shortfall which you could have had in place. You should command Yeshua, you should strengthen him, you should give him that confidence. Give him the vigor. Why? He will pass before them. We'll see what this means. And he will divide, give the land to them to inherit, the land that you seek, the land that I'm showing you. Now, what's Tzav Yeshua? Very often a person gets involved in a situation. He says, if I would have known the difficulties, I wouldn't have gotten involved. So Rashi says, when you tell him what he's assuming the responsibility, he has to know in advance. He says, "Alatirchos v'alamasos v'alamarivos." The burdens, the overwhelming difficulty, and the contentiousness of the Jewish people. They have to you tell in advance. He should know that. He has to know what he's getting involved in. And because once he knows that, what may happen? He may back off. He may feel it's too much for him. Because after hearing what it entails, he may actually choose to pass on it. Why will he be discouraged? As my Rebbe was punished because he didn't fulfill his agency as he should have. Also, I'll be punished because of them. I give him a guarantee, tell him he will go across the Jordan and he'll divide the land among them. He will. Now, this is important. There's a prerequisite. The only way the land will be divided, he has to be there. And if he doesn't, they will not have the land. The inheritance of the land is contingent on Yeshua being there. When he sent to the battle of Ai, And then there were 36 casualties. He wasn't there. The cave shenofel upon of Amlo Kumloch. And right away he prostrated himself. Ksiv, Atu Omed in Komcho. You're staying behind the lines and you're sending my children to war. What are you praying for? You know, you should be out there in the forefront. I told Moshe Rabbeinu, your Rebbe, that if you lead them into battle, then they will succeed. And if you don't lead them, it's not going to happen. That was it was a reprimand to Yoshua. If you would have been there, it wouldn't have happened. Over it. Now, why did we have 36 casualties in Ai? There's a story with Ochan, story in Yeshua. Ochan took from the spoils of Jericho, because he was like amazed. 36 casualties. Nobody was supposed to die in the battle. Why did they die? So they drew a lot. So Hashem says to Yeshua, your people sinned. Somebody had taken from the spoils of Yericho. He drew lots. The lot came out on Ochan. First was Shevet Yehuda, the tribe of somebody from tribe of Yehuda, and then he drew lots on the families, and it came out to be Ochan. And Ochan admitted that he had taken from the spoils of Yericho, and he was put to death for this. But I understand something very interesting. The reason why we had 36 casualties because Ochan took from the spoils of Yericho, and Hashem says to Yeshua, "What are you staying praying? You should have been out there fighting the battle." What do you mean? But we would have had 36 casualties in either case, because Ochan took from the spoils of Yericho. So what does that say? That even though there's a claim, if you would have been out there, you being there would have actually protected them. We need kapora, but the kapora wouldn't have manifested itself in 36 casualties. It's only because you weren't there. That's why the cost of that claim was 36 casualties. You understand what the Torah is saying? What are you prostrating yourself and praying for the problem? You could have prevented it all if you would have been out there. Because didn't I tell Moshe to tell you, if you're there, you're going to succeed. If not, it's not going to happen. I mean, as I'm talking, there's the new insight I have. I mean, I never thought of this. You read the story, 36 casualties because Ochan took up the spoils. No. Here it says it only happened because Yeshua, but it factually took from the spoils. Ochan would have been punished. Klal would have paid the price differently, but not with 36 casualties. That's what you see.